Good morning, everyone. As Mary Kane, I'm a research student conducting an ethnographic study of the grandmother experience. At the core of my inquiry is how folklore is being passed on in geographically separated families. But I'm also grandma far away with close family living in America, England, and New Zealand. My contributor grandmothers live on different continents too. You might think that makes us too dissimilar for research, but as Tamara Haravan specifies, we share a historic epoch, experiencing very similar post-Second World War education, healthcare, children's literature, and we articulate shared cultural values. Passing on family folklore has changed from the embodied learning associated with living in the same space to a combination of short visits interwoven with digital communications. In this paper, I shall describe the 5 resources we grandmothers are bringing to bear on digital connections and their contribution to the overall grandmother experience. To be a faraway grandmother is not new, of course. My Cornish grandmother had a son who went to Vermont in the late 1800s. She only saw him once again. We can only wonder how she felt about that. Let's imagine the most basic of sentient communication. I offer you an image that I remember from a 1960s National Geographic, much enjoyed by my great-grandmother's grandson, my dad. Jane Goodall describes the chimpanzee greybeard reaching out of his nighttime tree nest and touching fingers with another chimpanzee below. That moment seeming to say, "In this world, I am glad you are here. Me too." The touching of fingertips, the very thing we cannot have with geographically separated family. I ask, can we achieve anything as fundamental as this using digital technology? Do we even want more connection with our family? I constructed a quiz to ask this question, and all but one of my 46 contributors reported they do want more. There are always outliers in research. The first of my 5 resources is the biological predisposition to keep family close. At Emory University, physiologists have tested grandmothers and found they have more emotional attachment to their grandchildren than their children. We have more language too. Birthing the human infant, biologists say, has always required help from other females. This is due to the pelvis being a tight fit for the baby human head. And the linguist Deborah Tannen suggests that this is the reason women's language skills are enhanced. And we have the menopause. Very few other female mammals and no other primates have this time of infertility, allowing grandmothers time to support the younger generation. The second resource is love. And if we look at the 5 main kinds of love, and set aside the hedonistic and the erotic, we are left with 3 types of love that the grandmother utilizes. Storge, the love for family, agape, the unconditional love, and eudaimonia, the selfless love that requires no reciprocation. To further understand these types of love, I asked my contributors to select 4 quotations and place them in order of preference. The quotes ranged from the negative to the positive. The results revealed an interesting contradiction. In many cases, the most positive, "my family is my greatest joy," was selected and placed adjacent to the most negative. Family is supposed to be a safe haven, but it is there we can find the deepest heartache. Interesting. We can see from this that the grandmother practices selfless love whilst also understanding that difficulty comes with the territory. The third resource is our use of technology. Although my cohort and I are not digital natives, we have become capable digital immigrants. I emailed my contributors asking them to list the ways they are connecting with their distant family. I see all of them are using digital platforms, especially at birthdays and other family occasions. Sometimes parents help grandma by sending images that she can respond to. Jane Newell was happy to show me her latest on WhatsApp. I can also see a playful and inventive way to engage with the technology. Barbara explained that she rotates pictures of her grandchildren as phone screensavers. And she says the grandchildren always ask, "Who is grandbaby of the week?" I began to send photos as a way to connect with my son in America. They were an alternative to the awkward, "How are you?" I sent random pictures called "Wayne, where am I now?" These communications didn't require an answer, although sometimes the reply was a cheery, "How the heck would I know?" But when I hadn't sent one for a while, he said, "I like your Waynes." My contributor, Wendy Burton, established a habit for a Sunday breakfast informal Skype meeting when the grandchildren were babies 16 years ago. There were no rules, she said. Food could be eaten in front of the camera, pajamas worn, yawning was permitted. Both ends of the family tried to recreate a natural meal together. In New Zealand, Linda Kent Lindsay is able to record stories to a Tony box kept beside her grandson's bed in Germany. The fourth resource is the reluctance to give up the old forms of communicating. I see several of my cohort have retained the old ways of keeping in touch in parallel with the new ones. Denise McCaffrey regularly makes albums and writes to her grandchildren with no expectation of a reply because she says she wants to build the relationship over distance. Mary Benny is keeping things analog too. She has recorded her family possessions in a photo album she's leaving to her family. She calls it the Look Before You Biff book because she imagines a future lack of interest. This picture shows a family artifact, the Nutcracker and Bowl, brought back from the Pitcairn Islands 80 years ago. Resource 5 is the feeling that along with Mary Benny, my contributors feel a responsibility to the family past. Barb Price told me she never takes family rings off because she says they feel like my sacred connection. Jenny Johns writes to her grandchildren individually and includes tiny pieces of her family memories. This is a recent one. She writes, "The shaving mug was your granddad's. I can still see him lathering up." These three contributors are leveraging the dead, as Hageman and Hill describe in their Ethnology of Ancestors. They are preserving their argot, building family identity, and venerating their forebears. From all these contributor observations, we can see an enthusiastic engagement with the digital age. And my contributors do report positives within the digital. Wendy Burton told me, "I was worried that they wouldn't recognize me when I arrived at the airport, but they ran towards me shouting, 'It's Grandma!' and hugged me. I was so happy. I think all those Sunday Skype calls helped." But are we changing the grandmother for the younger generation? I will be asking, are we becoming digitally diminished to thin description as described by Clifford Geertz? Or are the interactions we make with separated families replicating old grandmother folk ways. But what of the future? Many of us have been uploading our personal data onto the internet for 2 decades. So are we unwittingly turning ourselves into synthetic grandmothers, avatars, that future generations will be able to access? Alan Turing predicted in 1950 that machines would be able to converse with people by the year 2000. Perhaps he was slightly out with his dates, but Tasha Dunn, in her paper, Contemporary Autoethnography is Digital Autoethnography, describes how hard it is to keep our private lives separated from the machine of the internet. In an episode of the science fiction series Black Mirror, the character Ash has been remade using all the information about him on the internet. Here he is with his living girlfriend as an avatar, an electronic image, communicating by touching fingers. Or is he? And last year, computer scientist James Vlaus described in his book, Talk to Me, how he made a dad chat box from audio recordings made of his dying father. So now, in a limited way, he can still chat to him. Communicating with family in these new ways will have far-reaching implications. The research of Marshall Duke has found that a knowledge of family stories increases mental resilience in young adults, and the grandmother is the most trusted kinkeeper. So, as I am sure my great-grandmother would have agreed, even digital grandmothers will be preferable to no grandmother at all. I conclude that through the application of these 5 resources, this group of active grandmothers are finding their feet in a world mediated through digital technology. They are negotiating with and capitalizing on digital methods of communication to find alternative spaces where they can touch fingers. And if in the near future loved ones are recreated in digital form, and where ABBA goes, we will most likely follow, some of you won't have to remember your grandmother through a shaving mug or a nutcracker brought back from the Pitcairn Islands. You will have access to so much more. And good luck with how you will feel about that. Thank you very much for listening.